Shandon Baptist Church exists to make, mature, and multiply disciples of Jesus Christ one life at a time in the Midlands and beyond.
Love and marriage, they go together like a horse and carriage. This I tell you, brother, you can't have one without the other. Yes, many of you are recognizing those lyrics from the famous song Love and Marriage, sung by Frank Sinatra. Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn D. Mercer Plank. This Shandon Plus podcast continues our Great Questions series by answering, how do you build a stronger marriage? As always, I'm joined by Shandon Senior Pastor Dr. Daniel Dickard, and with us today, a lovely special guest, like how I got the word love in there, his bride, Cassie Dickard. And you guys, I know that I was asking, I have to tell on both of you. I was saying before this podcast recording about this song, Love and Marriage, and both of you said, you don't know this song?
Never have heard the song.
Never.
Well,
we're showing our age right now, Dawn.
Yes, you are. I'm showing mine. So you two have been married a little more than 12 years. What was it, Daniel, that made you say Cassie is the one with whom you want to exchange wedding vows?
Well, let's just start here. I introduced myself to Cassie twice in the first 5 minutes of meeting her, and I forgot that I spoke with her the first time. Real first impression that I made.
You forgot that you had already met her?
I forgot that I had introduced myself.
Because you were so nervous around her?
Well,
or you
it was
just...
a large room.
No, he didn't notice me. That was really what happened.
So I was in the doghouse from the first 5 minutes.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
And Cassie, go ahead. No, you got more?
But then.
Yeah, you're going to redeem yourself?
I'm going to redeem myself right here. Then she agreed to eat a Big Mac with me at McDonald's for our graduation celebration. And that was a strong sign I'd found someone special. I remember thinking, if this girl can hang with me over fast food on what's supposed to be a milestone moment, she might really be the one. That's right. But all joking aside, it didn't take long for me to realize that Cassie was different. From the start, that she was genuine and real. There was not a fake bone in her body. And what you see with Cassie is what you get. Someone who is full of kindness, compassion, and integrity. And, in a world where so many people wear masks or try to impress, Cassie stood out because she was just always Cassie, and that was more than enough. And she's always been someone who puts others before herself, not in a performative way, but in a deeply sincere and servant-hearted way. I watched her love people when no one was looking, serve when it cost her something, and care about those who were in front of her, and that just impacted me deeply. She was someone that genuinely cares for people more than things.
Daniel should write for Hallmark.
That just filled the love bank. So
that was awesome. That was awesome. Cassie, what about for you? What was it about Daniel that made you say he's the one? Besides the fact that he took you for a Big Mac.
Well, we knew each other for 4 years, and we met in freshman year. And what drew me to him was he used to have, believe it or not, really blonde, kind of like spiky, shaggy hair. And so physically, I was attracted to him right away, even though he did not notice me, as he mentioned earlier. But then his personality is very outgoing, and I love that about him because I'm more of an introvert. So being able to talk to him was so much easier. He was goofy. And then I did see that he loved the Lord. But as we matured and spiritually and in growth and growing through college, I knew that our senior year, he was the one that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And it was a great decision. He's my best friend, and I look forward to every day getting to spend time with him.
Awesome, sweetie. You married on December 28th, 2012, right after Christmas celebrations and ahead of New Year's Eve get-togethers. So other than the poinsettias and tinsel decorations that made for this beautiful setting, what a busy season to get married. Guys, why, just out of curiosity, did you pick that time of year? They're both trying to answer.
You go ahead.
Well, the real answer is, Dondi, that I wanted to marry Cassie as fast as I could before she changed her mind. So I figured out if we got to the altar quickly that she wouldn't back out. And, of course, thankfully that she said yes, and here we are 12 years into marriage. I wanted for us to get married right at the end of our senior year before I moved off to seminary. We were already engaged at the time, and so I wanted a quick turnaround from engagement to wedding. wedding, which would have been
3
3 months. She wanted to go home and plan the wedding. Thankfully, we decided that, the option of me going out to seminary first, getting things settled, and then after we got married, she came out to seminary. So it just happened to be December, that time of year, when it was a good break in the semester. But Cassie, I think that you had just more in the story itself of why we picked December. I think, didn't you say this was something you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted a winter wonderland theme, even though I lived in Florida, so that's kind of comical.
Yes.
But it was beautiful. But also, I just wanted to enjoy the wedding process, and 3 months seemed very fast after graduating and then moving and planning a honeymoon and a wedding with family. And so we waited, or at least I guess I won that battle.
Yeah.
I think he still would choose the summer wedding, but
Yeah.
I think December was a good choice. I don't know that I would recommend it because it is a very busy time.
It is. In fact,
year.
that makes me wonder, how do you guys keep your anniversary every year special when it is smack dab in the middle of holiday chaos?
Yeah, so we're very blessed by family. We go down to Florida every year after Christmas, and every year, whether it's my parents or my siblings, they make sure that we have near our anniversary or on the day of our anniversary that we either have a night out for dinner or maybe a
good.
little night a getaway just for a night. And so we're very grateful for that and their sacrifice to give us that time together.
Good, good. We know obviously a house is built on a strong foundation if it's going to weather the storms. What does the Bible, Daniel, say about the foundation for a strong marriage?
Yeah, I love that word foundation, Donley, because the Bible is clear. The foundation for a strong marriage isn't built on feelings or compatibility or even shared interest. It must be built on God himself. I believe that there in Ecclesiastes, it talks about a cord that is not easily broken. And so from Genesis to Revelation, we see that marriage is not just a human arrangement, that it's a divine institution designed by God to reflect his love, covenant, and character. So let's go back to the very beginning there in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, where it says that a man would leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two would become one flesh. This verse reveals the foundation, that there's a leaving, as I've heard one person say, there's the cleaving and then becoming one. So marriage is a lifelong covenant, not a casual contract. Our world likes to think of marriage as a contract, a transaction, but it's a promise to stick together through everything, not just because it's always easy, but it's anchored in something greater than emotion. It's commitment in God. And then I think about Ephesians chapter 5. This is that passage where it says, husband, love your wife the way that Christ loved the church. And it says that wives, submit to your own husband as unto the Lord. And so there seems to be this reciprocity between love and sacrifice and just the commitment in marriage. So a strong marriage is built when both spouses are first submitted to Christ. When he is the center, we begin to love, not just with a human effort, but with a supernatural grace. And I can even say that, in our marriage, that it is the foundation of Christ. Even from the very beginning, I'll tell a story just briefly. When Cassie and I went on our first date together, so we had some friends that went out together. I had a roommate that he liked another young lady. They're now married, but she would not give him the time of day. And finally, she consented to go on a date with him. And he called me and he said, hey, would you please find someone to go on a date, a double date? She'll only go out with me, this other lady, my friend, roommate, if it was a double date scenario. So I ended up calling Cassie and I said, hey, this is for our friends. Let's, go out. And we had a great time together. And then I believe it was a couple weeks later, there was a Clemson football game. Interestingly, it was Dabo Sweeney's first game as a head coach.
Oh,
it was Clemson versus
yes.
Georgia Tech. And there were supposed to be a bunch of friends to go together, and everybody bailed at the last moment. And so I had asked Cassie, I said, well, do you still want to go? Thinking that she'd probably be uncomfortable. We had just met. We ended up going to that game together, and it was just one of the best experiences. I think we met some other people there, but we were able to go to the game. And after spending that afternoon, I thought, here's someone who is beautiful. She has a great personality. But she shared with me on the way back to school, she said, I've never dated before. It's not that I didn't have the opportunity, but I just want to make sure that, whomever I'm dating, they love the Lord. I'm looking for someone And as she started enumerating all these different things, I thought, all right, she's beautiful. She is fun to be around. She loves the Lord. And that had to be the foundation. I mean, all those other things were great, but it was the love for the Lord and her genuine love for people that I think first attracted. So I think that foundation that we're talking about here of Christ being at the center, there's got to be Christ-centered love, shared purpose, and then this commitment to a covenant, not just comfort.
You know, I love that you said that she had told you early on that she wanted someone who loved the Lord, because that would have spurred you, even though you loved the Lord already at that point in your life, but that would have been an area where you must have thought, hey, I have to live for this because I like her. And this just solidifies your commitment to doing that. And it's always neat when couples can help each other in growing like that. I'm curious, Daniel, for you, what area of your life have you seen growth at any point in your life because of what you've learned or observed in Cassie?
Well, I may not have grown in communication. So let me just tell a quick story to those listening on the podcast. Whenever we started talking about the idea of doing this particular podcast, I had failed to share with Cassie that she might be a podcast guest. And in the middle of one of our recordings that I text Cassie and I said, hey, might you be interested in coming on a podcast? I can't remember the exact language. Mm-hmm. And the next thing we know that we had committed Cassie without her giving her answer. So I'm still learning in communication in full transparency.
But when we get to the how do you forgive each other question in the podcast we'll have Cassie answer.
But areas that I've seen growth is first of all that marriage can, I think, reveal selfishness. And, I think all of us at times can be self-centered. And, I think even about Philippians 2, where it says to consider others more important than ourselves. And that sounds great in theory, but marriage puts it into practice. And that's something that happens daily. So I think that, by us having children together and being married together, that we have to have a we mentality rather than a me mentality. And also, I think that marriage has taught me how to grow in grace. I've seen firsthand how powerful that forgiveness is, and we've learned to give each other the benefit of the doubt, to extend grace when we fall short, and to move forward rather than moving away from one another. And so I would say those two areas, selfishness, but also how to show grace has certainly been something that through marriage I've learned.
What about for you, Cassie? What things have you observed in Daniel that have changed your life, an area where maybe he's helped you grow?
Yeah, so I would have to say would be my spiritual growth. When I read this question, the first thought that came to my mind was when we were in seminary and we would every day walk for 3 hours together. Not 3 hours, excuse me.
Wow, I was
3
impressed.
miles.
Yeah.
3 miles.
So
that would be great. 3 miles together. And during that time, and not just during that time, it'd be around the table or pretty much any time, we would talk about the scripture. We would talk about what the Lord's doing in our life. He would come home and talk about what he's learning in class. And through those conversations, I saw in my life, my spiritual life growing deeper in God's word. And so I thought that was a really sweet time in our marriage. And it's growing in different ways now. My prayer life has changed tremendously because of the prayer life that I see in him and how he's encouraged me in that. And so those are a couple of areas that I would say that I've grown.
When I wanted to pose that question to you guys, I thought, what would I say of Craig in my life? And honestly, I think I'd put it simply as to lighten up. Yeah. I think that especially with things like with the kids, where I'm so by the book, I can become very legalistic I can fall into legalism easily. And he has been able to have a way about him where it doesn't rock his world if things don't go in the household as I think they should. He's a little more flexible with it, a little more grace-oriented. And I think that has really stretched me, but it's been very freeing because I have been able to say, I don't have to get all wigged out if the house isn't perfect or the kids aren't perfect or what I think I want them to be doesn't happen. That's an area of, it's amazing how a mate can help you grow in those areas.
Absolutely. And I just think back to Cassie, what you said during our time in seminary when we would walk around just the seminary and talk and having that time together. It really was an iron sharpening iron. And in those days, I mean, we had nothing. We were poor seminary students that were, living on ramen noodles and, a very, very, very small budget. And yet I look back and think those are some of the greatest days of our life as we were growing, we were getting to know one another. For us, and we say this often, Cassie being from Florida, me being from South Carolina, but moving away to Texas where it was just us.
Yes.
It was one of the best things for our marriage because we had to learn to depend on the Lord, but also to depend upon one another. I think our unity, our teamwork, we grew together in marriage. And so much of that was during those long walks just around seminary. And sometimes we talk about scriptures and things that I was learning in class. Other times it was just life and goals and dreams. And I think I would give anything just to be able to go back and do that again for a season. Now with 4 kids that, we don't get those moments as often. But those are some of the sweetest moments early in marriage, just us getting to grow together in a time where we had nothing.
That's awesome. And so we've talked about the communication. How would you guys say you've worked to cultivate deeper intimacy and communication in your relationship, and how could that be a good advice for others?
Yeah, for me, I would say, just a couple things. Number one, prioritizing intentional time together. I think quality time builds emotional closeness. Every Friday, we have our date morning
That's
together,
right.
and we love that time. In fact, Cassie will often say, she'll say, Daniel, I'm longing for just to get to Friday. Sometimes if we can just get to Friday, that date morning together.
And that's without children at all,
That's
right?
without
Without
children.
Just you two. That's good.
Just
That's
the two
good.
of us.
Just the two of us. Creating a safe space to talk. I think that's been something. I heard this not many years ago from one of my mentors, but he said, in marriage, dialogue daily, date weekly, get away seasonally. And
You better repeat that.
yeah,
That was good.
Dialogue daily, date weekly, get away seasonally.
Good.
And we've tried to live by that. I mean, we will put on our calendar every quarter, we're going to get away either a family vacation or just the two of us. Date weekly, every Friday morning, we go to the same place where we have, date morning together. Dialogue daily, having that time at the end of the day, sometimes the beginning of the day, just where we're able to connect together. And then just staying connected spiritually, us being able to talk about just what the Lord's doing in our life. Those are 3 ways from a deeper intimacy and communication.
Okay, I want to look at Cassie now because a lot of women, Cassie, it's so easy to put children above the husband. So what advice would you give women in making their marriage a priority and not putting that relationship with the kids above the relationship with hubby?
Yeah, I do think it's easy when you have children to always provide for them and giving them what they need in their schedules and making sure they have everything that they have. But what's important in your life, you do make time for. And so our marriage is very important to me. And I know it is for Daniel as well. So and he hit on this a little bit in the last section, but making time for each other. And each season that's going to look different. In 12 years of marriage, that has looked very different at different seasons. But finding time to be able to talk to each other. And whether that's you've put your kids down early and you stay up for an hour and talk to each other, do takeout, or you get up early and work out together and have conversation and then pray for your children. We have the opportunity now to go on dates together, as he mentioned. And so just finding time and making that a priority and don't letting that slip away is very important.
So important. Daniel, when it comes to men, what advice would you give them in making their wife a priority?
First of all, I'd say be present. And I'm not the best at this, and Cassie would be the first one to say, not from a being present. I can be present physically, but sometimes
Your mind's-
mentally.
yeah,
That's
your
right.
mind is going.
And it is a great privilege pastoring a church like Shandon, and being able to work with an incredible team where there are thousands of souls that you're able to shepherd and guide. But there's also that great responsibility, and with the start of the iPhone, and then with now you have emails always on your phone. You're always pinged. You're always one text message, one phone call away. What that does is, sometimes you can be physically but not mentally present. And one of the best gifts that our kids gave me this past year, that right when I come into our house on a credenza, there is some woodwork that they made where I can drop my phone, my wallet, my keys. And it's just a reminder that I try to pray, Lord, help me to be as present right now as I was the rest of the day. And, somebody told me years ago, don't sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. And I think that's so key. I mean, our family is our first ministry and our most important. Another one I would say is pursue her heart, that being your wife. If you're going to make your wife a priority, pursue her heart. Plan time together, surprise her, encourage her. The same intentionality that you had while pursuing her before marriage, I think, should continue after the vows. Supporting her spiritually, praying with her. As Cassie alluded to earlier, there are a lot of mornings that we'll be able to get up together and we'll work out together, have time to talk. But then at the end of the workout, that we pray together. And I think one of the greatest things that you can do in marriage is pray together for one another. I can't tell you what an encouragement it is to my soul when I hear Cassie praying over not just my task when it comes to ministry, but praying for the protection of my heart, praying that I'll be the father that God has called me to be and to do. So that just challenges me. And then just being able to serve her daily, whether that be with helping with baths for the kids or doing the dishes, and being able to serve. I think that's a great way. Many of our listeners probably have listened to the 5 love languages, and people have different love languages, but finding a way to serve, to love, to be present, and to pursue.
Awesome. And if not, there can be a lot of stress. And you guys have 4 children. For any families, even without children, stress is going to hit the household. So how have you guys been able to handle that kind of stress in your relationship?
Daniel and I handle stress very differently.
They're looking at each other right now.
We, so when stressful times come in our relationship, I tend to just want to go to bed. Don't talk to me anymore.
You want to retreat.
I just need to go to sleep.
But
And
you mentioned you're an introvert.
I'm a huge introvert, so I internalize everything, and I don't want to talk about it. My sweet husband that is sitting next to me wants to get right to it and talk about why do you feel this way, analyze it, get to the bottom of it right then and there. And so I think that shows just a difference in our personalities. And 12 years in, I think we're still using those moments of how we handle stress, but we respect each other in that. And so I understand that about him, and he understands it about me. And so we're able to laugh about it now when those moments do come.
So what do you guys try to do? I mean, do you try to meet each other in the middle? Like Daniel, you give Cassie a little breathing room first, but then Cassie, you also say, but he doesn't want to wait till tomorrow to deal with this. How do you handle it?
2 words: grace and space. Grace and space. So, I'm the guy that wants to process out loud at 10:30 p.m. at night. I want to overanalyze everything, which can be quite annoying at times. And she's the one that by that time, she's halfway through her sleeping cycle. And so, we've learned, hey, we're not going to go to bed angry at one another, but sometimes the most spiritual thing I think you can do is take a nap and just rest. And so we try to operate off of that grace and space. As she mentioned, we handle stress differently. And so I think part of staying connected is recognizing those differences and not expecting the other to respond like we do, and learning that we are different in that.
And I would have to say, like, the fastest way to get over that stress is to always hear your husband say, "Honey, you're right."
Oh,
And she's always right.
well, we knew
Always
that.
right, Cassie.
We knew that. There's another song. I did the Frank Sinatra one, Love and Marriage, at the beginning. But if you look at Disney's Cinderella song, So This Is Love, So This Is Love, So This Is What Makes Life Divine, I'm all aglow, and now I know the key to All heaven is mine. My heart has wings and I can fly. And it goes on and on. You know, so many people want that fairy tale wedding, but it has been said that Cinderella drove the prince crazy with her obsessive need to clean the castle and that she missed her day job. So how can couples deal with unmet expectations in their marriage, especially when they don't feel like their heart has wings anymore?
I think practically it starts with honest, grace-filled conversations, sharing how you feel, not to accuse, but to understand, walking into a conversation to understand, not with accusation. Sometimes unmet expectations aren't even spoken. And so they just sit quietly and I think grow into resentment. So talking about them, praying about things together, even inviting God into that tension, especially if it's a Christ-centered relationship. I think also remembering vows that you didn't promise to love only when you felt like it. You promised to love faithfully. I mean, that's even the word agape, unconditional love, that even, when you don't feel like it, we're still called to love. And then, as someone has said before, when your heart doesn't have wings, let your roots grow deeper. And so God often does his best work in the quiet soil. So those are just, a few areas that I think that meeting those, trying to help with those unmet expectations.
Sadly, a lot of marriages today are not standing the test of time. About 41% of first marriages and 60% of second marriages end in divorce. Now, while those statistics are depressing, the good news is that those numbers actually are trending down a little bit. Still, though, Daniel, what are some of the things happening in relationships to cause their downfall?
Yeah, as you sent over some of the questions for the podcast, Dondi, I wrote down 3 quick responses regarding, these issues, these core issues that go unaddressed. I think number one, selfishness that goes unchecked. When each person is primarily focused on what they're not getting rather than what they can give, I think the relationship starts to break down, and marriage and healthy relationships are built on mutual sacrifice, not constant self-preservation. I think also unmet expectations, and we talked about that previously, but every person walks into a relationship with expectations, some that are realistic, some unspoken, and some that are totally unfair. And I think it's not the expectations themselves that cause the damage. It's when they go uncommunicated or become demands rather than desires. And then when there's little to no communication, I think that's another area. When communication dies, connection dies. And a lack of meaningful conversation leads to assumptions, distance, and I think even eventually isolation. So I think we've got to fight away from the silence, and there's got to be a desire to reconnect emotionally and spiritually.
Of course, always there has to be forgiveness as well. How would you guys say forgiveness plays into building a healthy relationship?
I would start by saying without forgiveness, no relationship survives. With forgiveness, every relationship has. So what would you say to that, Cassie?
And it's not just the
agree
big
with you.
things, right, Cassie?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just little things
Little
like,
things.
hey, you said you'd be home at 4, but you're home at 4:30 or 5 or
That's
6.
a constant daily
Yeah.
forgiving. True.
and especially if it's like there's been a commitment, I am going to get home on time, it does require some forgiveness. Otherwise, bitterness is going to set in.
I would agree.
Yeah,
It doesn't survive unless you're able to forgive.
always. So as we close, I'd like each of you to give one piece of advice to those listening on how to have a vibrant marriage. And granted, there are numerous things. But if you're to give one, Daniel, I'll start with you. What would it be?
As we just mentioned, the forgiveness piece, forgive quickly and often. Forgiveness isn't optional, it's vital. In any relationship, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I think there's the capacity to hurt one another. And I think you can disappoint each other, but forgiveness keeps the heart tender and the relationship moving forward. Our daughter, Carolina, one of our children, she, recently had as her verse Ephesians 4:32, which she would say daily in our house, which says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ forgave you." And so I would just want to say to everyone listening today, forgive quickly and often.
What would you say, Cassie?
Yeah, I think we've hit a lot of good points in the podcast today as far as committing to one another, communication, spending time together. But the one thing that I would advise other couples is, where are you finding your fulfillment? Are you finding your fulfillment in God or your spouse? And when you find fulfillment in God, loving unconditionally and serving sacrificially and respecting and forgiving, those things start to tend to come more naturally. And so your focus has shifted from yourself and what you can get out of it to how can I honor God in my individual life, but also in my marriage.
Okay, she nailed it.
She nailed it.
She nailed it indeed. I think for me, I once heard someone say that your husband, or for men, your wife is not the enemy. Satan's the enemy. It's really easy to look at the other person and find fault, or to think you're the problem. I love how you said, Cassie, how are you serving your mate? By serving God. And your husband or your wife is not the enemy. It's Satan, who wants nothing more than to wedge his way between you and your mate. That's the enemy. And that's one we need to be upset with, not a mate. So husbands, love on your wives. Wives, love on your husband. And Daniel, Cassie, thanks so much for spending time. I'm sure listeners are going to love being able to hear from you, Cassie. So well done. You better buy her flowers now, Daniel.
Flowers, and
Chocolates,
that's
yeah.
right. And we'll go out to eat at a nice
Yes.
dinner. She'll hold me to it sometime soon.
There
Yes,
you go.
I will.
Well, we have enjoyed hearing from both of you on building a solid marriage and keeping that bond strong. And next week, we're going to continue talking about relationships when we answer the great question of, what does it mean to be a good friend? For Shannon Plus Podcast, I'm Dondi Mercer-Plank.
And I'm Daniel Dickert, Senior Pastor of Shannon Baptist Church, signing off. We'll see you next week.